Hello, Mr. Manuelliam. Top of the morning to you, because this time we have another Let's Play instead of a speed paint. Um, yeah, this is Hyper Light Drifter. I'm sure you've heard me ramble about it before. Probably. Anyway, it's probably my third favorite video game. Um, I recorded this playthrough like ages ago. Because I went through and I was like, oh, I should play Hyper Light Drifter again. I really like it. It's a very good game. There's not many other games with its style of like top-down hack and slash combat that I like. And then I was like, oh, I should record this so I have some footage. The next time I want to make a little video essay for my good friend Manuelliam. And I don't really have that many speed paints sort of saved up, so I should just get the gameplay footage of it, and I can keep it until I use it. And so I did that, and then I didn't have anything to say for about like 6 months, I think. And it's just been sort of eating up storage space on my laptop ever since. But here we are. It's finally come back in use. Everything's great. Everything's fine. But yes, for Christmas, my friend Toria got me a book, High Conflict by Amanda Ripley. Apparently it came very highly rated by such illustrious figures as Hank Green and D'Angelo Wallace. Apparently has a very good Goodreads score. And this quite pissed me off because I found this book to be mid at best, and I was filled with a petty contrarian rage, so I wish to lay out my arguments against it in the format of a video essay as God intended. But yeah, my thesis for this videoed essay is, this book is mid. It's not bad per se. I would agree with most of the ideas it espouses. I would agree with most of its thoughts, but I certainly wouldn't sing its praises. I think that Hank Green might have bad taste in books. Maybe he should read more of them, or perhaps other better books. I'm truly baffled that anyone would recommend this book without caveat. But also, I'm sort of a pretentious bitch, so, take it or leave it. In more specific terms, I'd say that the persuasive power of High Conflict is limited by, I would say, 3 main factors, in order of least to most important. First of all, the text is just sort of mid on a writing level, divorced from content, makes some baffling formatting decisions, and just generally isn't particularly interesting to read through. Not the worst sin in the world, but I'm docking it points because I have Moby Duck on my bookshelf. Secondly, I would say that the author has a very obvious sort of center liberal, capital L liberal kind of bias that they never acknowledge. Honestly, if they had just been like, yeah, I'm a centrist, this is what I believe, this is how I believe the world is, this is how I believe the world should work, I would have been like, well, okay, at least you know who you are and what you think, that's acceptable, that's respectable. I might disagree with you, but, okay. But overwhelmingly, the impression I had was that the author was completely blind to her own biases, which, well, that is, as the kids say, cringe. Especially for a book on rhetoric. Thirdly, and I think most damningly, the book is frequently shockingly hypocritical in the way that it applies its arguments, in a way that I think really damns its own persuasive power because, well, if you don't do the things that you say you should do, then why in the world should I listen to you? You clearly don't believe your own words. So firstly, formatting, and I do admit that this is the most nitpicky, pedantic part of this entire review. a lot of these things are things that would be non-issues in other better books. I would have just been like, okay, sure, you can write it like that, why not? But because I'm irritated by this book, it just all sort of becomes more irritating, and so I shall complain about it. First things first, the author has chosen to put the glossary at the very beginning. I don't know why they've done this. Glossaries usually go at the end, and on one hand, I'm like, well, it is easier to find now, and it sort of gives you a preview of what's to come, but also the overall effect is sort of that of being lightly pelted by a small barrage of contextless definitions. And it's not useful as a reference yet, because you haven't read the book, you don't need the reference. And within the glossary it makes some interesting choices on what it chooses to define and how to define them, that none of it's particularly wrong or anything, but it's just I don't know, for example, try this on for size. Power of the binary, the dangerous reduction of realities or choices into just two. For example, black and white, good and evil, Democrat and Republican. Fair enough, that's, okay. You don't know what this is referring to, you don't really know the context for it, and those of you who are particularly rhetorically minded might notice that, hey, that's usually called a false dichotomy, or a false dilemma. Why did you name it Power of the Binary? And that sort of happens throughout the books. If things are just sort of named a little bit weirdly. Secondly, it's got a principal characters list. I don't know why they've done this. This is truly very bitchy of me, because I think that in any other book that was maybe an indie book of some sort, I'd be like, oh, that's actually kind of charming. I would have been charmed by it. I would have thought it was cute. You're trying to imitate a little play or a script kind of thing. I don't know why. In this book, it irritates me once more, because it's just I don't understand why you put this here. This didn't need to be here. And thirdly, none of this is capitalized. The author has made every chapter title and subsection title lowercased, and back in the Catalyst, we used to have a very strict policy of no all lowercase poetry. You have to be able to justify and defend why you're using all lowercase if you so choose to use it. And I used to think we were being too harsh, because I was like, well, all lowercase writing does have a different vibe from properly capitalized writing. There are political reasons to do it. Bell hooks is sort of the most famous one. And just people can write in all lowercase. I think that's valid. This book has radicalized me against that. I don't understand why the author has not capitalized any of the section titles. I genuinely wonder if it is maybe it is a house style of the publisher? Maybe is the author trying to come off as non-threatening? It gives the entire thing a vibe of a sort of Rupi Kaur 2012 Tumblr poetry post that I don't think is what they are going for. Again, truly just another nitpick. In a different book, I would have been like, oh, okay, sure. But in this one, it just... Every time I saw a chapter title, it snagged on the eyes like a branch catching your clothes on a walk. Oh god, it's moved me to incomprehensible metaphor. That's how bad I am. That's how badly I'm doing, okay. Overall, and this is getting a little more into content, but I'll put it here. Personal preference, I get pretty irritated pretty quickly when a book is mostly water is wet studies, and look man, I appreciate the scientific value of water is wet studies, I understand why we need to have them, but when you write about it, when you use them in a non-fiction book making an argument, the overwhelming effect is that you spend several chapters being whoa, scientists did this cool experiment where they showed people pictures of kittens and then pictures of a school bus on fire, and people liked the kittens more. And it's yeah, I think I could have told you that, just sort of based on, like, I don't know you really needed a scientific, I don't know that you really needed to try to convince me of this fact. I kind of would have just accepted it as true based on having been alive in the world. And I find that, like, I can withstand about, like, I would say 1 to 3 water is wet studies before I really lose patience with an author. It's just like, this just feels like you're talking down to me. This just really feels like you're wasting my time with common sense knowledge, and presenting it as though it is revolutionary. But I acknowledge that, like, I think that's a me problem. I think if you really want to present your argument like that, you should support it with scientific evidence. Fine, you know, okay, whatever. And thirdly, again, personal tasting, I think the writing itself is mid. I think the prose is just kind of mid. Like, it's just... I think that you can tell that the author is coming here from a background of journalistic writing and not creative prose writing. Like, here, I got the book in front of me, let me flip to, I've got citations, fuck you. See, let's read a section from High Conflict by Amanda Ripley. This is a section on Gary Friedman. He's a lawyer, and this is a little bit about a conversation between 2 clients and Gary. Gary was stunned, not so much by their decision to get divorced. Gary knew they had been struggling. Jay had been having an affair. Drama. Sorry, that's me. They had 3 young children and not enough steady income. All that Gary knew already. No, what surprised him the most was that they wanted him to be their lawyer. Their only lawyer. I could only represent one of you, he said gently, looking back and forth between them. Hearing this, Lorna's face fell. Gary tried to explain. Try to represent you both would result in a conflict of interest. They were dear friends, but for some reason he found it hard to talk to them that way in this moment. And, like, this entire, like, girly pop, get a better dialogue. This is, like, Lorna's face felt, like, this is cliche writing. And just, like, I don't know, just listen to it. It's not, it just sounds kind of stupid. I don't know how to say it better than that. And, like, this is a subjective opinion that I'm giving, but, like, it just does, doesn't it? Now, here's a section from Moby Duck, which is a similar reportive non-fiction book. It's about container spills in the ocean, so not exactly scintillating topic, but listen to how the author writes, just like writes. The late evening sun, however, still shone brightly as a midday sun, making the 10,000 pools of melt that speckled and marbled and gilded and puddled the ice flash, as if some Nordic or Inuit god had dropped a handful of change. It's, like, what a potent metaphor. What good imagery. Just, like, Donovan Home did not need to go off like that, but he did, for love of the craft. Or here's another one. As the mainsail came down, crackling and snapping like a bonfire, a white maniac against the black sky. Like, he didn't have to write it like that. He could have just said, and then the mainsail failed and fluttered and flapped about in the wind, and, like, I really think that there is a lack of beauty in the writing of this text, which is a strange complaint for a non-fiction book, but, you know, again, I love Moby Duck with all my heart, and so I have seen how good it could be. I truly believe that High Conflict could have been written beautifully, but it is not. It's just a bit of a bore to get through. It's not so bad as to be, like, sort of actively negative. It is perfectly serviceable, it is adequate, it conveys its meaning and its tone, but, like, I was not compelled by it, I was not impressed by it, I was not moved by it. At no point did I think, oh, I should save that quote in somewhere. Which I usually do for books this long. Anyway, that's more of a personal disappointment. I won't dock Amanda Ripley too many points for any of this. You know, it's fine. And then on to the sort of, I'm putting this under formatting, but here we are starting to get more into the content, is that I would say that the definition of high conflict is itself oddly nebulous through the text. I would, the author defines it as like, here, I'll just, I have a glossary, I'll flip right to it. So, good conflict is friction that can be serious and intense, but leads somewhere useful. Does not collapse into dehumanization, also known as healthy conflict. High conflict. A conflict that becomes self-perpetuating and all-consuming, in which almost everyone ends up worse off. Typically an us versus them conflict. Now you'll notice that these are oddly nebulous lines like, hey man, first of all, what you really want to call it is bad conflict, and it's pretty obvious, just call it bad conflict. Secondly, it's like, I think it's cheating if you just draw the lines around the thing that causes everything bad with your definition and then go, yeah, that's the thing that causes everything bad. Like, okay, well that's because you defined it that way, come on. Anyways, point 2, moving on to the actual meat of the discussion. The book is deeply centrist. And at first you might be like, well, okay, the book is centrist, whatever, I personally might not like it, but like, people are allowed. To which I would say that, to you, Manuelliam, I guess, my hypothetical straw man. I don't know why I've made you a straw man, I'm sorry. But like, I would say that like, fuck it, I'm taking the shot. I think that the author's centrism means that she does not adequately understand the reasons which people actually get into conflict with each other. Like, this book cannot be about conflict resolution because she does not understand why people fight. Because people, part of it is rhetoric, part of it is how we talk, but part of it is, in fact, what we believe. And centrism is so devoid of values and beliefs, it is fucking allergic to them, that, like, this book will never actually work in real life. And, like, in fact, the later examples of the work of the book itself, it mentions people don't actually change their minds, even when they're using these models of arguments. And I would argue it's because people believe things. It's not only about the arguments. They do, in fact, think things about the world. I sound hysterical right now, but, like, okay. So, like, let's take a step back. Like, for example, throughout the book, the author will, mention occasionally that, like, yeah, regular people need to, get back into politics. Like, when you have high conflict all the times, it drives people towards extremism. And, like, in general, extremists are the ones who, like, stay to the town halls, they, like, go to rallies and protests. Extremists are the ones who really push for their ideals, unlike quote-unquote normal people, regular people. Occasionally, she'll even call them civilized people, which, like, that's a word with some loaded connotations. That would not fly in any sort of academic setting. You can tell that she's not an academic. Minus 10 points. But anyway, there is so much to unpack in this idea. It seems like, because it makes sense on the surface, right? Like, yeah, extremism, generally bad, like, okay, only the extremists are left, regular people don't, like, really stay in on these things, okay? Like, it all sounds like it makes sense, right? Hang on. First of all, there's kind of 3 fallacies being committed here at once. One, constructing a public. Regular people, normal people. What does that mean exactly? Who exactly is regular people? What do they think? How do you know that's what regular people think? Can you show me proof? Like, you are always, whenever someone refers to the public, you are always constructing the public. Because, like, the public doesn't fucking exist. The public doesn't think anything. The public's not concerned about this or that. The public doesn't believe this or that. There is no public. Whenever someone says the public, unless you can bring me like 5 sets of data to back it up, like, no, this is what you think regular people think. This is what you believe that regular people believe. There is so much bias in there. There is almost always an agenda being pushed, and the fact that Amanda Ripley does not justify this or like just says regular people is such a huge red flag, and I would consider it just a rhetorical foul ball. Minus 30 points. Secondly, middle road fallacy, just sort of down the middle. The idea that like, yeah, extremism is always bad. We should always take the sort of moderate approach to things. And like, again, this sounds makes sense. Like, okay, extremism generally is indeed extreme. Usually the middle point of two positions is the more nuanced and reasonable one. But like, this is still not necessarily always true. For like an easy example, let's say we've got two beliefs. Belief one is that I should beat my friend Manuel to death with a sledgehammer. Belief two, I should not beat my friend Manuel to death with a sledgehammer. The middle road of those two beliefs is I should like sort of severely maim my friend Manuel with like maybe a regular hammer. I hope we can all agree together that, like, the middle road in this case is in fact not correct, even though it is in the middle of those two beliefs. Which beliefs are extreme and which beliefs are moderate are entirely dependent on the specific context and the specific beliefs being espoused. Like, the only way you would believe otherwise is if you were a fucking centrist who valued the civility of a debate over the actual things being debated. And this goes hand in hand with our third fallacy of false analogy, of just assuming that the two extreme beliefs are equal just because they are both extreme. I think frequently and often to something my roommate told me back in college about a professor they had, where the professor posed the question of like, isn't raising a pride flag at a leftist rally the same thing as raising a Confederate flag at a right-wing rally? And the answer to this is, in fact, no. No, what are you talking about? Just because the two actions look very similar on the surface, you are raising a flag at a political rally, does not in fact mean that they are equal or the same, because we have these things called values, and words have these things called meanings, and pride flags and Confederate flags do in fact mean different things. They are symbols that do in fact symbolize something. One of these is saying that, a supportive statement for gay rights. The other one is a supportive statement for white power. And if you think those two things are equal, then you don't have fucking values. Then you don't have your own set of moral principles about the world. One of these is in fact right, and the other one is wrong. And just because it is not an objective moral truth, which does not exist, by the way, doesn't mean that they are equal. Things can be subjectively right as well as objectively right, and I'm sorry, but there is no shortcut to having your own values. Religion tries to shortcut it by giving you dogma, secular society tries to shortcut it by giving you the law, but neither, in fact, is a substitution for having your own set of morals. And this is pervasive through the text. Like, there's a whole section on what the author calls saturation points. The point at which a person stops being an extremist, is willing to let go of extreme beliefs, And, like, saturation point is such an interesting name for that. Because, sure, in the context of, like, de-radicalizing a neo-Nazi, then, like, yeah, you would want to try to get people to a saturation point where they will let go of their extreme beliefs. But, let's say in the context of leftist activism, you might hear this under a different name. You might hear it called activist burnout, in which case this is a bad thing that you should not be trying to induce in people. Like, people are willing to fight for their beliefs, and this is not inherently bad. This is just part of being a human being who has beliefs about how the world should be. Or even, like, the very first page of the book, the very first introductory chapter. It is about Mark Linus. He is an anti-GMO activist, and he has been moved to go through, and he is hacking through a field of GMO corn, and he gets chased by the cops for a little bit, and it's very exciting and whatnot. And it's all framed as like, oh, Mark got caught up in high conflict, and it made him kind of weird and insane for a bit before he came back to his senses and realized that he shouldn't do illegal things and, like, try to cut down people's corn. And, like, okay, I don't even believe in, like, anti-GMO bullshit. Like, I don't even think any of that is really true, quite frankly. But, like, the act of running away from the cops is itself not, like, I don't think it's actually a bad, sorry, I'm gonna get watch listed for this, but, like, I think there are things that are illegal and morally correct, and that's, like, just a fact about the world. I don't think this is even a hot take. Like, overwhelmingly, the feeling I get reading this passage is not, oh no, Mark got caught up in high conflict. The overwhelming feeling I have is, Mark has strongly held beliefs about the world and is acting them out. Like, okay, I don't think they're correct beliefs, and I think he's doing so in a stupid manner, but, like, yeah. What? That's fine. If you hold strong beliefs and you act on them, that's just what people do. This isn't a high conflict thing. This is just not being a centrist. And this is, I will say this is, I think, I will not attribute it entirely to politics. I will say that as a book about rhetoric, I think books about rhetoric frequently commit this similar mistake. They make it all about the rhetoric. It's all about how you argue, and none about what you argue, even though that is, in fact, important. Or here's another example. The book talks about, back in 1930 in Montgomery, Alabama, the swimming pools were segregated between black and white people. And, eventually a guy challenged that, let me see, Mark Gilmore, he was a black man who was walking through one of the parks and challenged it in the court. And the court gave it to him. Like, the court decided that the white-only policy was unconstitutional. Okay, good. And then, however, afterwards, in response, the city shut down all of its parks and all of its swimming pools. And the book frames this as like, oh wow, everyone lost, black and white. That is a direct quote. In fact, I'll just keep reading. This is a sure sign of high conflict. Every attempt to make things better seems to make it worse. The glosses accumulate. And it's like, well, hang on a fucking minute, because a very interesting piece of reframing has just happened. Instead of what you would expect the framework to be, i.e. that, the blame is on white people were really racist and did something horrible out of their own racism. Instead, the blame has been subtly shifted onto, wow, everyone got caught up in high conflict. Black people didn't advocate for themselves in the correct way. That's fucking insidious. And that takes us to our third point, that this book is hypocritical as hell. It is, I don't know how to say, like, committing rhetorical foul balls despite being a book about rhetoric. Like, I think the most glaringly obvious example is one with Gary Friedman. He's a guy who's running for mayor in his small town, He used to be a conflict mediator, so he's like, oh, I could probably mediate these political conflicts, which, prima facie, that's stupid, someone should have stopped you. And there's a part of the book where the author is like, now, you might be tempted to think that Gary was just, like, an insane old man who got taken over by his ego, and you think to yourself, I wouldn't do that, I'm not like that guy. To which I would say that, hey, man, on page 32, you are the one who is framing Gary like an insane old man. Like, there's literally a whole section where his son Cassidy is trying to talk him out of going into politics, and he's like, it describes it for him from Cassidy's point of view, and he's like, this felt familiar to Cassidy in a bad way. He'd seen his father let his ambition get away from him before. Despite his usual humility, despite his deep knowledge of the human psyche, his dad would suffer from delusions of grandeur. He was doing it again, Cassidy saw, even now. A man in his 70s letting his ego run wild. Like, girl, you are the one framing Gary as an insane, egotistic old man. And now you're like, now you might think Gary's an egotistic old... Like, well, no shit. You're the one putting your words in my mouth. Here's another example. One of the parts of the book is, towards the end, the author talks about, humiliation and shame, and how you have to avoid that in order to stop people from going into high conflict, because, when you humiliate someone, they tend to really start sticking to their guns, because now it's very personal, it's very emotionally charged, and, like, straight up, I think that's a true statement. I think this author is correct about this, but... Let's flip back over to Mark, okay? Like, just for a second. Like, it rings hollow because, like, here on page 11, Mark is out to, he's still on his anti-GMO shtick, he's still on that campaign, and I'll just read the section out for you. In 2001, Mark walked into a Borders bookstore in Oxford and threw a supermarket sponge cake into the face of a Danish statistics professor with whom he disagreed. The professor was promoting his book, in which he detailed why he'd abandoned some of his more extreme views on the environment. "That's for everything you say about the environment, which is complete bullshit," Mark yelled in an unnaturally high voice. It was all very awkward. Not at all like he'd imagined. The statistics professor quietly wiped the whipped cream from his face. The audience, waiting for the reading to begin, stared at Mark, confused. And, like, let's take a step back. What emotion is being evoked here? How does this make you feel, being put into Mark's shoes like this? Fucking embarrassed. Fucking ashamed, secondhand embarrassed, scorching secondhand embarrassment of like, oh my god, all these people are looking at me, I didn't have a plan, I just threw a sponge cake in some dude's face and he's not reacting the way I thought. Like, this is a deeply emotionally manipulative framing, and like, that's not even a problem. Writing is 90% emotional manipulation, but at least do it fucking well. Also, notice how cliched that passage was. It's just not very well written book, back to point A. Anyway, like, the book uses the exact tools that it tells you not to use. Also, just as a side note, Mark eventually realizes, after years of campaigning as an anti-GMO activist, that he should, one day, he's reading his comments on his article, and he's like, man, I should check, like, if there's scientific evidence that GMOs are bad. And it's like, what? Hey, man, what? Like, I don't think the problem with Mark is that he was caught up in high conflict. I think the problem with Mark is that he's a fucking idiot. Like, the man didn't do his research. That's a different issue from being embroiled in quote-unquote high conflict. It's also a bad thing. It's like the simultaneous of like, I don't even believe in that kind of like performative protest that Mark's doing where like you toss a can of soup on a Van Gogh painting or whatever, but like political protest because like you think that people are doing things that are wrong is like, I don't think that's inherently bad or stupid the way that this book seems to think it is. Like, I do agree with the book that I don't think it's particularly helpful. I don't think it's particularly good rhetoric. I don't think anyone's going to really change their mind because of it. But at the same time, it's like, I don't think acting on your values in a direct way, perhaps taking some sort of direct action is like a bad thing to do. This is not a ridiculous thing to do. Like, some of us believe in things and are willing to do things for those beliefs. What? Like, taking extremist action, if in the context of like, okay, let's say you're a neo-Nazi taking an extremist action, that is bad. Let's not, don't get it twisted. But if you're like an environmental activist, like, blowing up a pipeline, I think that might. If you're someone assassinating a healthcare CEO, this is extremist action. I think it might also just be correct action. The thing you do does in fact matter, and it does in fact affect whether or not it is the right or the wrong thing that you have just done. I don't think Amanda Ripley understands this. I think that if she read How to Blow Up a Pipeline by Andreas Malm, she would, like, touch the book and disintegrate into dust, I assume, from being in proximity to someone with values. And there is no objective moral truth here. There is only subjective moral truth, and we're each going to just have to develop our own and fight it out amongst ourselves. There is no shortcut. And please resist the siren's call of moral relativism, just cutting that off at the pass. This is life. Figure out what you believe in, fight for it, change it if necessary. There's not... This book wants to promise you a shortcut. This book wants to promise you control. And I think it's lying. I think it's wrong. Anyway, at the very end of the book, the author talks about a section where a group of very liberal Jewish people from New York decide to start a sort of exchange programs of sort with, like, prison corrections officials who are very, in, I want to say, where was it? Michigan? Minnesota? One of the M states. Yeah, it is Michigan. Okay, and so they have, like, this little exchange program, and it's like, you know, the Michigans are all, like, Trump supporters, the New Yorkers are all leftists, of course, and, like, you know, they're like, you know, we should try to have a conversation with each other, we should talk to each other instead of assuming we know who each other are, and, you know, they do that, and they come out of it with, like, a better understanding of each other and themselves, and I'm like, okay, yeah, that's pretty good. I think that the world would be a better place if we did more of this stuff. However, the book itself even admits that, like, even as these people used all the tools of rhetoric espoused in this book, at the end of the day, like, the pandemic happens after the pandemic happens, and, like, people repeatedly throughout the section, like, say that, like, yeah, but I did not change my view on these matters. I didn't change my opinion on gun rights. I didn't change my opinion on LGBTQ rights. And it's like, well, yeah, you, like, there is a limit to what rhetoric can do. There's a different book on rhetoric, a better book on rhetoric, to be frank, called Thank You for Arguing, and, you know, it goes through, it is both better written and more interesting to read, and, more specifically about rhetoric and less about politics, and it talks about a concept called Kairos. It's one of the, maybe Kairos, actually, but it's one of the many sort of little tools and tips of rhetoric contained within that book, and Kairos is the idea of time, of opportunity, that, like, you must make your argument at the right time and place, you know? For example, if you try to make your point immediately after somebody just got into a car accident, you're probably going to have less luck than if you try to make your argument, for example, right after having a really nice dinner with them. You know, some pretty basic common sense stuff, and this is my personal toxic trait. I think Kairos is the only fact of rhetoric that matters. Like, if someone's not ready to hear what you have to say, they simply will not hear it. Nothing... I won't say that nothing you say matters, but I will say that, like, you are a lot less in control over whether you can change someone's mind than you want. Like, I think that's just the true statement about the world. Like, I would also say that in this section, like, there's also, like, one of the characters, Martha, she's, like, she's one of the New York Jewish people, and she's, like, she has this conversation with this guy, Caleb, he's one of the, prison officers, and they have, you know, disagreements on the Second Amendment, you know, Caleb is like, yeah, I want to own guns because I want to be able to, you know, have them for self-defense, for sport, and in the worst case scenario, self-defense against the tyrannical government, And Martha is incredibly bewildered by this idea that someone would feel the need to arm themselves against their own government. And I'm like, this so firmly marks you out as like center left specifically, not a single inch further than center, because it's like, no, the like far right and far left are in fact in disagreement on this one of fuck the government. Like, that is, in this case, horseshoe theory is in fact correct. Like, honestly, pro-gun leftists is like not as uncommon as you think. The author's like absolute bafflement at this concept is, I think, rather telling. In general, the book is also like frequently comes into places where it's like you are 1 inch off of like anarchist ideology, but you don't recognize it. I think you just haven't read any anarchist ideology, so you don't realize that you are like so close to it. Like a lot of its thoughts about like talking in the Gary Friedman section about like how to speak to people is like, a lot of that stuff runs just slightly to the left of like anarchist consensus organization, like consensus-based organization. And like, I think this would just be a better book if the author had like taken the time, had the knowledge to explore that, to be able to accept that like there are modes of government other than democracy that might be valid. There are modes of government that we probably shouldn't do, like fascism and like dictatorships, but like, I don't know, man, like, and like, granted, socialism has not had the best track record historically speaking, but like, I don't know, man, like, I think it makes the entire book's argument weaker that, like, it cannot imagine a better future than this. Like, I think, like, even in the book itself, there's a section where, like, one of the Trump supporters, she voted for Obama, and she voted for Trump, for the same reason. They represented change. And this is what the centrism cannot grapple with. It can only think about it in terms of left and right. It is falling into its own trap that it warned us against, the binary trap of, like, sorry, it calls it the power of binaries. I'm gonna call it by the regular name, i.e. false dichotomy, or false dilemma. Anyway, like, it's only thinking in terms of, like, the left and the right in modern America, when in fact, like, I am personally increasingly convinced that, like, what people really want is just, if you would allow me to be a political pundit for a second, if I were to run for an office, the speech that I would give is not like along right wing or left wing. It would be like, hey, you're a smart, thinking, feeling human being. You know it in your heart, in your bones. You know it right now. Just like, look around you. This isn't working. Something is wrong. Something needs to change. And that's it. Like, that's... And, like, right now, the right is presenting more change to people. The right represents the change. Right now, the left does not represent the left. It represents the establishment. And so, anyway, that's why Trump won the fucking 2020... what year is it? 2024 election. Like... You can feel it in your heart, in your soul, in the air. This cannot go on. And, like, note how I made no reference to any fact, any statistic. I didn't say anything specifically political. Just, like, the establishment itself is, like... funny that this book came recommended by Hank Green. Because the other day I was watching a couple of videos, one of them by Hank Green, I think a couple also Jon Stewart ones that were, like... they were interviewing and talking about, after the pandemic, how there's been all of this inflation, right? You live in America, you've seen the prices. And, like, they were both making the point, Jon Stewart's interviewee and Hank Green, that, like, actually, our system is working exactly as it's supposed to work. Like, we are doing better than other countries. We have less severe inflation. Like, everything, all the safeguards are there. They are working. And, like, you know, the framing is that, like, you know, like, we're gonna be, this is okay. Like, and, like, what they're not saying there is, like, this is the best that this system can do. And this is not good enough, is what many people are now, you know, explicitly or implicitly deciding. Like, this is not livable. to quote from a Disco Elysium fanfic, I can't remember if I liked it, I just remember this quote specifically. The year is 51. The sky is blue. We can no longer live like this. It's not a failure of the system. The system has functioned. It has done exactly what it was supposed to do. We have all done exactly what we were supposed to do. But the system was flawed from the onset. It was bad from the foundations, and so now we're here. And I personally don't think that the system that caused the problem and perpetuates the problem will be able to fix the problem. I don't think it is capable of it. It would be going against its own nature. By definition, it would have to become something else. The right wing promises fascism as the solution. The left wing promises nothing. Of course we voted Trump. Anyway, the beginning of this book opens with a quote. And it's a good quote. I'll write it down. I'll save it in my little book of quotes, and I'll read it out for you now. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. It's from the Sufi poet Jalal al-Din Muhammad Rumi from the 13th century. I am going to give you a much less beautifully concise quote. I'm going to read out the entirety of the fucking Disco Elysium Kingdom of Conscience thought project. You get this thought project, well, Manuel, actually I don't know how far you got into the game, I'll explain it. In Disco, you get thought projects when you just sort of look around the world, interact with objects, talk to people about things, and if you keep giving certain dialogue options, then you'll probably get a thought project that'll pop up, and it'll be some sort of question, some kind of problem that you're grappling with. And if you choose to accept your thought project, you'll just kind of think about it for a while. You know, you don't do anything to advance the clock, but you just have a set period of time where you're just sort of got this project on your back burner in your brain, you know? And then eventually you'll come up with a solution, whatever answer that you have found to your problem, whatever answer that satisfies you. And the Kingdom of Conscience is the project that comes up if you keep giving centrist dialogue answers. The vocab terms that are relevant here, moralism is one of the ideologies in Disco Elysium. It is the belief that all change must be incremental. Revolutionary, violent, sudden change is always bad. We would probably equate it to capital L liberalism, centrism, in our world, and, you know, the moralists, the coalition, they are basically the game spoof of the UN. You can tell that this was written by an Estonian team. So I'm just gonna read out the entire thing to you. Problem. Heartache is powerful, but democracy is subtle. Incrementally, you begin to notice a change in the weather. When it snows, the flakes are softer when they stick to your worry-worn forehead. When it rains, the rain is warmer. Democracy is coming to the administrative region. The ideals of DeLorean humanism are reinstating themselves. How can they not? These are the ideals of the Coalition and the Moralist International. Those guys are signal blue. And they're not only good, they're also powerful. What will it be like once their nuanced plans have been realized? And the solution that you arrive at is... the kingdom of conscience will be exactly as it is now. Moralists don't really have beliefs. Sometimes they stumble on one, like a child's toy left on the carpet. The toy must be put away immediately, and the child reprimanded. Centrism isn't change, not even incremental change. It is control over yourself and the world. Exercise it. Look up at the sky, at the dark shapes of coalition airships hanging there. Ask yourself, is there something sinister in moralism? And then answer, no. God is in his heaven. Everything is normal on Earth.